Good morning, and thank you for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Robert Hadlock. Texas lawmakers in both the Senate and the House this week voted to overhaul child protective services in Texas. It was unanimous, 3 different bills, 2 chambers, and not one lawmaker voted against them. Political reporter Phil Prazen takes an in-depth look at Senate Bill 11 and how it hands some state responsibilities to nonprofits.
Briefcase in hand, Wayne Carson, CEO of the nonprofit ACH Child and Family Services, tries to convince lawmakers his group holds the keys to the state's child welfare woes.
We know our community and we can make faster and better decisions for kids that are more well informed about what their needs are.
The nonprofit watches over abused and neglected children around Fort Worth, making sure they're out of dangerous situations and into safe ones. In a 2014 pilot project, ACH workers took over a role previously held by state caseworkers. Lawmakers are now trying to phase in that so-called community-based care, first in North Texas, then in 8 regions across the state over 2 years.
Let's go really slowly. Let's make sure that the community is ready for this step before we implement it.
Sarah Crockett oversees Texas CASA volunteers who will tag team with nonprofit workers instead of state employees.
Improved outcomes that have been a challenge in the foster care system for over 20 years.
But if this bill becomes law, the success of the program will still rest in the Department of Family and Protective Services. ACH put up $6 million of their own money to make it work at the beginning. Other nonprofits likely won't be able to do that.
They are going to need to make sure that there's money in the budget to implement it successfully.
And if it doesn't work, the state will continue struggling to take care of its most vulnerable. Phil Prazen for State of Texas.
There are other requirements in the Senate bill to help protect children in CPS care. It creates an oversight and quality assurance division within DFPS. It requires all children entering the foster care system in Texas to get a medical exam within 3 days and a comprehensive assessment within the next 30 days. When there is suspected abuse or neglect at foster homes or treatment centers, CPS investigators would be required to have face-to-face contact with victims within 72 hours instead of the current 5-day standard. Georgetown Senator Charles Schwertner authored Senate Bill 11, and Senator Schwertner joins us now for some perspective. Welcome to State of Texas. Appreciate you coming in.
You bet. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
You bet. It's not often you see a bill pass unanimously in the Texas Senate. Did you expect to see that level of support?
Well, I'm honored to have that level of support. It speaks to it being a bill that affects all Texas. It's not a partisan bill. This was unanimous support on a bipartisanship basis, because I think the members of the Senate, the members of the legislature understand that CPS needs to be addressed this session and that all ideas are welcome and the best ideas need to be passed and implemented.
What are some of the challenges you see going forward with getting this bill rolling through?
Well, it's passed obviously one big hurdle, passing the Senate, and I'm proud to have, I think I was 27 and 28 co-authors, and of course it was a unanimous 31-0 vote. We need to work with the House in fashioning the best policy. They have a number of ideas in their House Bill 4 and 5 and 6. And as soon as those come over from the House, we'll look at their ideas.
Where's the money going to come from?
Well, we need to find the money. It's a tight budgetary cycle, but we need to prioritize where we spend our money. And certainly the care of our children that need the assistance and protection from abuse and neglect and exploitation, as well as children in our foster care system. They need our help, and we need to make sure we fulfill that duty.
Looks like there's going to be about $12 billion in the rainy day fund. Are you in favor of going to that pile of cash to pay for this?
I think we can find it in existing revenue. There's a number of exceptional items that the department has asked for. Right now their budget is $3.8 billion. They want, on top of that, $900 million more. We're looking at those exceptional items to the budget and making sure that they fit within the entire parameters of the mission of the Department of Family and Protective Services. And I certainly anticipate that a number of those exceptional items will be funded.
Texans have seen attempts to fix things at CPS that have not succeeded. How certain are you that this is going to make a real difference?
Well, it's not the status quo. We need to do something different regarding the Department of Family and Protective Services, in particular about foster care. And what this does is allow communities to re-engage, to get engaged in the care of their children that reside in that community. This is not a top-down approach coming from Austin, but it allows for local nonprofits with an historical mission in child welfare or local governmental entities, such as county government, for instance, to set up a system that is right for the children of that region, to allow them to have individualized case management function, individualized plans for that child that's right for that child, the right type of care, the right type of therapies, the right type of setting for that.
We've seen a number of times over the years, we need more money is going to fix things. How certain are you that more money is going to fix this?
Well, we do need more money in the Department of Family and Protective Services, but we also need to have the right policy. Money is not the answer to the entire answer to the problem. We need to have the right strategies that engage our faith-based and not-for-profit community to assist us in the care of the children of Texas. This is not just the responsibility of government, it's the responsibility of us all.
We know about the federal court case, and does Senate Bill 11 do enough to keep Texas from preventing another lawsuit from the federal government?
Well, I wouldn't want to speak to, obviously, the judicial aspects of how they might rule in the future, but certainly this goes a long ways to addressing some of the major concerns brought about by Judge Jack's ruling, those that concern investigations, capacity in our foster care, and the concerns brought about by residential treatment centers and keeping children in inappropriate settings that are not conducive to that child.
Switching gears a little bit, we've got South by Southwest coming up in Austin in the next several days. A lot of people coming into town, reaching for their phones, trying to get an Uber or Lyft,
Yes.
and they're not going to have it.
They're not going to have it. That needs to change. We need a statewide policy that allows for a very novel and innovative industry, ride sharing, to flourish. We don't need restrictive local ordinances, a patchwork of local ordinances that really are put in place to protect outdated unions and industries such as the taxi industry.
Folks in the city of Austin would say, we're all for local control. We want to control what's going on in our city limits. What's your response to
Well, transportation doesn't stop at the Austin city limit borders. This is more of a regional or statewide issue that needs a statewide response. I also would say that the issues of safety and mobility need to be spoken to, and are issues that are statewide issues as well. And it's unfortunate that we don't have a very vibrant ride-sharing industry in Austin, and especially don't have the services of the two largest providers of ride-sharing, Uber and Lyft.
And quickly, rural communities would like to see this as well.
That's right. It helps mobility across and to be able to take a ride-sharing service, across county lines, state lines, and the impediments that are put in place by certain restrictions at the municipal level just really shouldn't be tolerated.
Senator Charles Schwertner, Republican from Georgetown, thank you for coming in.
You bet.
Appreciate
it's
it.
Great to be here.
Thank you. She died in a jail cell after a controversial arrest. Now see how her case is bringing focus to new laws aimed at protecting people in custody here in Texas.
I believe that real and positive immigration reform is possible.
President Trump sending conflicting messages about immigration reform. Why that's leading to big questions about any immigration measure in Congress. After months of waiting, former Texas Governor Rick Perry has a new job. Vice President Mike Pence gave Perry the oath of office Thursday afternoon for the post of Energy Secretary. A Senate vote confirming Perry nearly 3 months after President Trump announced his nomination.
Just as then President-elect Donald Trump looked across his desk and said, Perry, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do for American energy what you did for Texas. And I said, I got it, Mr. President, I can do that.
When Perry ran for president, he wanted to close the Department of Energy. Now he'll lead that department, overseeing the country's nuclear weapons programs, energy research and conservation, as well as domestic energy policy. President Trump raised hopes about immigration reform before his address to Congress on Tuesday night, but his actual speech set a much different tone, leaving a lot of unanswered questions. Manu Raju has a closer look from Washington.
President Donald Trump told reporters he'd be open to a dramatic shift, legalizing some undocumented immigrants as part of a broad compromise bill.
I believe that real and positive immigration reform is possible.
But during his speech to Congress, Trump was vague on the details, instead emphasizing tougher enforcement and building a wall on the border with Mexico.
As we speak tonight, we are removing gang members, drug dealers, and criminals that threaten our communities and prey on our very innocent citizens.
The mixed messages spawned confusion on Capitol Hill and left many deeply skeptical that any immigration measure could pass Congress this year.
But what's a necessary forerunner to getting what you call a comprehensive bill is to build confidence with the American people that we're going to deliver on what for the last 20 years we said we're going to deliver on, secure the border, and we haven't delivered on it.
He said that he suggested that he could be open to legal status for undocumented immigrants. He told that to reporters yesterday. Would you be open to that legal status?
Before you even deal with that question, you've got to take care of these other things. That's the most important thing you got to build confidence for.
Conservatives are dubious that Trump may back off his hardline stance on illegal immigration.
You know, I don't make it a habit to respond to rumors passed on by reporters.
It wasn't a rumor. It was the President of the United States.
Well, you're welcome to testify and give your own views. I'm going to wait till I see specific legislative proposals to comment on them and not chase down every press rumor of people.
What about just the idea of giving legal status to undocumented immigrants? Are you open to that idea?
My view is we need to secure the border. I don't support amnesty.
The pushback comes as Trump is trying to deliver on his central campaign promise to build a wall paid for fully by Mexico.
We will soon begin the construction of a great wall along our southern border.
But the billions of dollars that Congress will first have to approve have given some Republicans pause.
We've got to find some way to pay for it. We can't just continue to add debt.
And some influential Republicans question the viability of the wall.
Because there are parts of the border where an actual wall would be incredibly expensive for taxpayers and incredibly expensive to monitor. I think there's a way to do this, but not on the entire border.
And that was Manu Raju reporting from Washington. NBC News fact-checked some of the claims the president made in his address to Congress. The president touted his lobbying ban as an example of keeping his promise to drain the swamp in Washington. That claim is true. The president enacted this change by executive order on the 8th day of his presidency. But he also made it easier for former lobbyists to join the executive branch by revoking a 2009 order blocking individuals who had worked as a lobbyist in the previous year from taking administration jobs. In terms of unemployment, the president told Congress that 94 million Americans are out of the labor force. While the number he cites is technically correct, it is misleading because it counts Americans who are unemployed by choice, including high school students, retired seniors, and stay-at-home mothers. According to PolitiFact's math, the real number of Americans who are out of work now and in the job market is 21 million. That is a fraction of President Trump's number.
And they're hoping that those of you who have the power to vote this into law, that you pass it.
A call to action for state lawmakers: how a woman's death after a controversial arrest could lead to new protections for people in Texas. A judge threw out the federal securities fraud case against Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, but he still is facing criminal charges at the state level. He's accused of misleading investors in a high-tech startup by persuading them to invest but not telling them he was being paid by the company. The accusations happened before Paxton became Texas Attorney General. The federal judge dismissed the federal case this week without making judgment on the charges. Paxton's trial in the state case is scheduled to begin on May 1st. On Monday, the U.S. Justice Department announced it would drop its challenge of the Texas voter ID law, but that's not the end of the case. Opponents of the law argued their case Tuesday before a federal judge in Corpus Christi. The law requires voters to show one of 7 accepted forms of photo identification before casting a ballot. The question is whether the requirements discriminate against minorities and the poor. The judge ordered lawyers to file more briefs and set a timeline for later this month to issue a ruling. In January, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to take up the case, but Chief Justice John Roberts said the state could try again after the lower court makes its ruling on whether the law discriminates against minorities. The Texas Supreme Court heard arguments in a case challenging whether local governments can pay employee benefits for same-sex couples. The lead attorneys in the case argue the 2015 U.S. Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage does not cover insurance benefits for couples who married before that ruling. Opponents say it's implied in the High Court's ruling.
The fear is that if this case were to proceed, that somehow we are creating two different classes of marriage. Again, which I would contend there's not a legal basis for, and that the United States Supreme Court was very clear in their ruling that same-sex couples cannot be treated differently.
The Texas Supreme Court initially declined to hear the case in September, but several Republican state officials urged the court to reconsider. A ruling is expected before the end of June. She died in a jail cell after a controversial arrest, and now her case is bringing focus to new laws aimed at protecting people in custody. Texas lawmakers filed the Sandra Bland Act this week, intended to address race, poverty, mental health, and accountability in law enforcement. KXAN investigator Brian Collister explains.
I talked to the family, Sandra Bland's family. They know that this is happening today, and they're hoping that those of you who have the power to vote this into law, that you pass it.
Standing in front of the Texas Supreme Court, Representative Garnet Coleman unveiled the Sandra Bland Act.
Get out of the car! And then I will light you up. Get out!
Wow. It stems from a DPS traffic stop nearly 2 years ago. The trooper got into a heated conversation with the driver, Sandra Bland, and she was arrested for assaulting a public servant. 3 days later, the 28-year-old was found dead in her jail cell, ruled a suicide by hanging. The bill would abolish consent searches during traffic stops and arrests for minor traffic violations.
This bill in total changes the definition of racial profiling.
If it passes, officers would have to have probable cause to search. Officers could not use the pretext of a minor traffic violation to fish for bigger crimes.
So when the DPS says, hey, we don't racially profile, well, if all this becomes law, yes, you do.
The bill also would increase police officer training for de-escalation and mental health awareness, and fund more treatment programs to keep people out of jail.
And I think about David Joseph, the naked 17-year-old teenager that was here in Austin. I think about last week here in Austin, the 30-year-old Morgan Rankins that had a history of mental health. But instead of serving these people and hearing the outcry, our cops are not trained to deal with these people.
We're supporting the bill.
Coleman's bill has the backing of sheriffs who run jails dealing with those with mental illness.
The mental health portion of the bill has long been a concern of Texas sheriffs.
Next for the Sandra Bland Act, legislative hearings trying to find a co-sponsor in the Senate, and from the Legislative Budget Board, a fiscal note, an official estimate on how much this could cost taxpayers. Reporting from the state capitol, Brian Collister, KXAN Investigates.
Part of this proposed law is a direct result of a KXAN investigation. Our coverage over the past 2 years revealing problems in the way DPS troopers record race during traffic stops. Some troopers were issuing traffic tickets to Hispanic drivers but recording their race as white. After our reports, the DPS admitted the problem and promised lawmakers changes to fix it. And they're making progress. In the 4 years before our investigation, up to 18% of motorists ticketed as white by DPS troopers had Hispanic surnames. After our reports in 2016, that dropped dramatically to just 4%. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. Stay tuned for Meet the Press with Chuck Todd. That's coming up at 9 o'clock. I'm Robert Hadlock. Have a great Sunday.